And we are live for our conscious conversation with Martin Rutte, who's been a good friend for many years. We met first through the Transformational Leadership Council, I think probably 10 years ago or so.
At
And,
least.
and Martin and I are here together to basically have a conversation. It's not an interview, so we're just conversing as friends. And I'll give a brief introduction of Martin. So as I mentioned, he's a member of the Transformational Leadership Council. So he does transformational work. I know you've been a management consultant and worked with Apple and Sony Pictures and spoken at Harvard Business School multiple times.
Yep.
You are the author of the book, Project Heaven on Earth, which is a really fascinating book about essentially creating paradise here now. But defined it in a very individual way. Martin's also the co-author of Chicken Soup for the Soul at Work. He's, I'd say, like, tell me if this is true, Martin, but one thing I'd say is, like, you're working on creating a new narrative for, like, how our story unfolds,
how our human story unfolds. Yeah.
Okay.
Exactly.
Why that? Like, how did you... Like, partly I'm just curious to know how you got into that. How did you go from, growing up in Canada to
Wait a minute. Your wife is Canadian. Don't.
Exactly. So, and I love Canadians too. They just
some of my best friends are Canadian.
They keep showing up in my life to torture my soul. So as you can see, this is kind of, we might do some things a little playfully too. But I'm genuinely curious. Like, I think you had some kind of transformation. You mentioned in your book, having a big transformation when you visited Brazil and you saw starving children there. Was that like the main thing that opened up this type of exploration for you? Was this a long time building? Was this something that, started with, further in the past? And how does this connect with management consulting? Like,
yeah,
that a part of it?
It is. So hi, everybody. Welcome. Good to be with you all. I was born in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada, which is like Pittsburgh in the US. Do we have people in other than the US online?
Oh yeah, we got people from all over. I see India.
Oh, all right. So I will do a global talk rather than a US
Finland,
specific.
Germany. USA, probably some
France. Bonjour France. Guten Morgen. Guten Tag. Oh my God. All right, great. So I'm born and raised in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada, which is a steel city. It's like Pittsburgh in the US.
That's where my mom's from, Pittsburgh.
Oh, that's our connection, clearly, right? We're both men of steel. So I could remember sitting on my front porch at home in the summers reading the newspaper, and I was always fascinated by the world and what was going on. And Stephen, I had this thought since I was a kid: I'm here to change the world. And it's like your name is Stephen, and my name is Martin. That thought was just present for me. And I went to university, studied counseling psych in Canada, worked for the federal government in Canada in a really interesting program on substance abuse, trying to end substance abuse. And I really liked that. But I saw my future in the government as non-existent. I mean, I was too much of a big mouth and got in trouble by telling my boss what I really thought. And so I ended up going to med school for a year, which was another not for me. And then I met this guy at a yoga retreat in northern Michigan, Bob Branscombe, God rest his soul. And he was talking about personal development, about responsibility, about commitment, about goal setting. I mean, I'd never heard any of that stuff. I was just mesmerized by all of it. And also at this yoga retreat, this little red neon light went on in my head. And it said, the name of the game is Martin Rutte, and you can play it any way. And I never knew that. And then a couple of days later, I met Bob, and he was a former vice president of a hospital in Chicago, and had developed this personal development course, which combined personal development along with management by objectives. I went to Chicago, took his course, and said, Bob, this is it. This is what I want to do. Came back to Canada, quit my job with the government, and had one or two real nightmares. I mean, where is the check going to come from? You know, I had to make it on my own. But I knew that I loved this work, and I saw what it did for people, in the sense that what Bob's brilliance is that people can either create what they want in life through their mind, through their ego, through their limiting beliefs, really, or they can step out of that into their soul and create from their soul. And so he developed this program where people would set objectives, and I get this because this phrase was really powerful, beyond what you believed possible. And I thought that was, I'd never heard anything like, so for example, I want there to be no hunger in the world. Well, that's impossible. What difference can I make? I can't do anything. I'm a guy from Hamilton, blah, all my reasons. And yet, that was still the goal. And so he taught me to give this course. And then I went on, people said, will you come and speak at our company about vision and setting goals beyond what you believe possible? I didn't know about speaking. I just said, sure, okay, I'll go. And then, would you come into our company and do consulting? I don't know about consulting. Sure, okay, I'll come. And thus this momentum began. And as you said earlier, I ended up at Harvard 4 times speaking on vision. And then in the late 80s, I'm trying to remember, I had a real crisis of the soul. And I looked in my life, and it wasn't my marriage. My marriage was terrific, still terrific. It wasn't my work. I loved my work, but something was like tongue and groove, carpentry. The two pieces were separated. And I didn't know what it was. Like, if I looked outside externally, everything looked fine. So what was wrong was inside. And I ended up at of all places, a Jewish boy, at an Augustinian monastery. And I had a very profound breakthrough in which I got that it's about spirituality, it's about God. And I started that work. This is really important to hear, not that I knew what spirituality was and I was going to impose that on you. That can't work. That's proselytizing. Rather, what I was doing was seeing if I could evoke from you a natural spiritual expression at this place called work. And so I helped start lots of conferences around the world. I really was one of the leaders in that field. I started a center for spirituality in the workplace at the leading business school, Sobey School of Business at St. Mary's University in Eastern Canada. And so I really put that conversation into the world, along with others. And then I began to see in my consulting, which was still going on in terms of working with companies on vision, that we were in this downturn in the late 90s. Computers had begun to replace people. The promise of computing had actually begun to take place. And so people were losing their jobs. Jobs were going offshore. And successful companies were laying off people. And that's when I came home and said to my wife, look, we've never seen anything like this. We've got to do something. And that's where the idea of, as you mentioned earlier, chicken soup. So the idea of chicken soup for the soul at work, my wife and another friend, Tim Klaus, produced that book. And that was a New York Times business bestseller. And what it did for me, Steve, was it opened the notion of story. I began to see that the way you can either be in a story and be at the effect of it, the world is nuts now, there's nothing I can do about it, and you're right, okay, fine. Or you can be declarative, that we have the authority through our declaration to say, this is the new story that we're creating. And out of that began this notion of heaven on earth, because I said, well, look, there's a lot of crap going on in the world that I'm not happy with. The environment, refugees, financial dislocation, all the stuff. But there was a lot of good stuff too, but we needed a new story for what it means to be a human and what it means to be humanity. And the idea popped into my mind, oh, you mean heaven on earth. And I can remember the first time I heard that thought going, oh my God, you can't say that. And then I thought, well, why not? I can talk to you about hell on earth, can't I? So why can't I talk to you about heaven on earth? So let me just stop there, because then we'll go into the heaven on earth stuff. But I mean, that's a good chunk of how I got to where I am.
That's fascinating because, one thing I hear in your story is you took this leap before the new vision was fully formed. At least that's what I'm hearing. Like, you left something that many people would see as very purposeful, because you were doing, work with substance abuse, with addiction and recovery. And was it just because it was government related that made you want to leave? I mean, like, why would you leave that behind? Because a lot of people would think that's got to be hard aligned work. That's got to be purposeful. Why not center your purpose there? Why look for something else? It sounds like there was a good reason to do that, though. Like, there was a bigger vision calling you, but you couldn't have seen all of that at the time, could you? Or was it like a soulful calling? Like, how did that show up? I think that's something a lot of people in our group will be especially keen to hear about, because I know a lot of the people, that are in our coaching program are looking for that kind of transition. Like, how do you transition to hardline work? And the big problem there is it's very much like you described. It's impossible to see the other side, to know where you're going to land. And so you have to have that bigger vision that goes beyond what you think is practical.
Very well said, Steve. When I first, let me go back, because there's been some points in my life where that theme keeps coming up. So the first was with the idea of vision. In the late 80s, I brought this notion of vision back to Toronto. And I had a bunch of friends and my wife around the kitchen table, and I said, dining room table, I want to talk about vision. Are you nuts? No, you can't talk about vision. They'll think you were smoking dope and you just came back from California. All of them, every single one of them said, no, you can't do it. You should not do it. What that forced me to do was look inside and see what's my truth. And my truth was, there's value in this thing called vision. And I have no idea how it's going to work. But it was the soul's calling, as you said. And then the second major inbreaking, I had an Anglican Episcopal bishop in Canada, God rest his soul, Bishop Henry Hill, who talks about the inbreaking. It just comes. You don't ask for it. You don't know it's coming. It just like bang. So the second one was this notion of spirituality and work. And people were even nutsier about that. You cannot talk about spirituality and work. People will think you're proselytizing. You have a hidden agenda. I mean, everybody in Toronto at that time that I spoke to, no. I went to LA. I met with Jack, our dear friend Jack Canfield, and a whole bunch of other people talking about spirituality and work. And all of them said, yeah. I said, no, I'm talking about spirituality and work. Yeah. Did you hear what I said? Spirituality and work. Yeah. They had no charge on it. And then I saw that the issue was my charge, not their charge. And so that again, I said, great, I'm in. And then the third major piece was the heaven on earth piece, when that broke in. And I knew, Steve, the moment I heard it, that's it. That's the next phase of my life. How am I going to do it? As you said, I have no idea. None. I just like, what's the next tiny step that I could take? Good. Do that. Start putting it out. Start talking to people. See, when I speak to you about heaven on earth, do you get what I'm saying? Or no, you're confused? Good. Then I'm not clear. I had to cue the book that you spoke about, took me 25 years to write, because I had to be clear about every second. And it's the way I book that you would get it the first time. That was the criteria. And once I saw that, then that was the book. So yeah, you're right. The soul calling, and my heart goes out to people who are trapped in work. I have a friend who's a headhunter up in Canada, and he talks to me about lawyers coming to him, who are extremely successful, making a ton of money, feel trapped, like dying on the vine, and they're really torn. What do they do? So he works with them to see how they can move forward.
Fascinating. You share something about the charge that you have for yourself, and then you talk to everybody in Toronto and they reflect that back to you. But then you go to California and that charge is gone. I'm curious if you experience a similar phenomenon that I experience in my life, which is that When I get into something new, I often feel that same kind of charge. I just define it a bit differently. It's like it's my own inner resistance. I think of it more as like a fear or worry about judgment. Like even if I've gone through that phase a lot and then dealt with the judgment of other people, still when I get into something new, there's this knowing like, okay, if I share this thing on my blog, then people are going to resist it, and then I got to deal with the criticism and stuff. And even though mentally I've been through that process many times and I know how it plays out, emotionally it still takes some, working up to it. And like, okay, when you're clicking the publish button and you're kind of like going, oh, I don't want to see myself doing this, covering your eyes, as you click it, and then still doing it. And one thing I've noticed, and I'm curious if you see this pattern as well, is that when I eventually get past that charge, when I get to the point where I fully accept this idea for myself, where I'm not resisting it internally anymore, it's like the whole world surrenders. All the critics give up. Sometimes I say that critics have no stamina because they give up after a while, and if I can get through that transition faster by actually leaning into the criticism and just exposing myself to more of it until it kind of like just cracks that part of me off. And I'm like, all right, I'm just going to accept that the criticism is there. I surrender to it. I give up. I'm not resisting anymore. I'm not really worried about the judgment. I just invite it and welcome it, even taunting and teasing the critics. I dare you, like as if you were to say, I dare you to like push my buttons about talking about spirituality at work. I think it's awesome. Back in your face, your turn, go ahead and criticize me. Do your worst. When you get to that point, it's like the critics just go, all right, we surrender. I give up. Have you noticed that type of thing play out in your own life?
I have two different takes on it. One is I remember when I started talking about vision, this was in early mid 80s, and really in Toronto, that word, optometrists used it, but nobody else. So I went to a guy who was the head of a very, very large development company. I mean, a very important man in the city. And I told him I wanted to talk about vision. And he said, Martin, that will never work. And him, who I had such respect for, saying it will never work, Steve, I looked at him and I said, Jack, thank you. That's exactly what I needed to go forward. And what I learned from that, and from sitting around the kitchen table, speaking to my friends and wife about in this case, vision, is I believe you have to listen deeply to what the critic says, because they could be right. Mm-hmm. And they could be wrong. And so I would take the criticism in, listen deeply, and go with respect to my own soul. Is what this person's saying accurate or not? If it is, I'll change. If it's not, I'll drop it. And so I learned that over many, many years. The other thing that I learned is a phrase that I call the addiction to being liked. And that is, you were mentioning it in a kind of backhanded way, but that's very important in today's society. It's more important for me to be liked by you than for me to look and see what's true, not in opposition to you what's true, just what's true to me, for me, and just put it out very gently with you. So the addiction to be liked is really huge. We're not taught enough to look at our own purpose, our own soul and what it says, and honor that, not to the exclusion of everything else, but to honor it.
I think Dr. Wayne Dyer described that as being independent of the good opinion of others. It's interesting to describe that as an addiction to be liked, maybe because of your background with addiction work. Maybe that's why that model resonates.
Maybe, yeah.
One thing I was thinking about, because you talk about this idea of vision and mission, and I've been just for some reason recently I was thinking about writing a blog post about corporate mission statements, and so I was just gathering a few of them from some of the bigger tech companies, and I thought it'd be interesting to share some of them with you because they're very short, just like
and just I'd love to, yeah.
What you think of them. So I got these from like the company's own websites or investor reports or such things as that. So for Google, their proclaimed corporate mission is, quote, to organize the world's information and make it universally accessible and useful. Does that fit, do you think, with creating heaven on earth?
Whoa, that's a very powerful question. One of the chapters in Project Heaven on Earth in the book, my book, is looking at institutions and what if the purpose of the institutions of society, business, government, law, healthcare, religion, what if their purpose was to help co-create heaven on earth? What would they do? So while I believe that Google's initial one was do no harm, wasn't it?
Don't be evil was one of their mantras. I wouldn't say it was necessarily their mission statement, but it was definitely a mantra.
Well, a mantra.
Abandoning later. And some people, kind of said, well, is it be evil?
I remember that.
Be too evil or just be a little bit evil. That's been a big point of contention for many of their employees.
Yes.
And have you heard, I want to hear your comments, but I want to share one more point about this to open it up. Like Amazon's mission statement is, we strive to offer our customers the lowest possible prices, the best available selection, and the utmost convenience. And, I think there's an element of these mission statements which connects with something in your book, which has to do with the idea of potentially the heaven on earth idea. You have this idea right at the end of your book that this idea could be hijacked for other purposes. Yeah. And I sort of wonder if that's where corporations have gone in some ways, because I think a lot of people feel like, okay, the mission statement is there. And there was a time when mission statement was just something that everybody ignored. But now I think corporations are, especially some of the larger ones, they are becoming more mission driven. But now people are concerned that their missions are becoming increasingly evil. And it's not like creating heaven on earth. It's maybe more in the hell or a purgatory category, at least for some people. And there was this rallying cry for instance, Jeff Bezos to do more for the environment. And he recently, I just learned through the Transformational Leadership Council, someone shared that he recently pledged $10 billion of his money to help at least create some change in that direction. But of course, people are kind of skeptical about that. Is this just a PR thing? Does he really care? There's so many ways to take this, this line of inquiry, but I'm just curious, like, how do you know, if there's real, like, does heaven on earth have to be grounded in real caring? Can it just be this vision that we go after traditional corporate style? Does there have to be something more human about it? Is the corporate machine hijacking this idea of vision and purpose?
So I think those are very relevant and wise questions, Steve. Years ago, the idea of a corporate purpose was ridiculous. The only purpose was make money. Shareholder value, period. And then over the years, we've seen other stuff: community engagement, the environment, social justice, LGBTQ, African American issues, all of those issues. And when each of those came in, you can't do that in a company. That's not what a company's for. No. But they began to come in. There were leading companies who started to do that, and then it started to spread. So now when you talk about a corporate mission statement, it's pretty well accepted. I think in terms of the evolution of society overall, that's a good thing. Is it perfect? No. Do some of them, I don't know if you know the phrase greenwashing, that some corporations pretend that they're green so they can look good.
Yeah, it's pretending to care is the idea.
Correct. Even for me, that's at least moving up the scale of caring. So one of the things that I'm concerned with that you mentioned was, what if some people use heaven on earth for, bad purposes? My sense is that will come. And I think that will be part of the maturation process of heaven on earth. To say it can only be this, and not that people will make mistakes and use it for bad purposes, I just don't think that's the way evolution works. But overall, as an old boss of mine used to say, which I loved, it's directionally correct. Right? The other point I want to make about mission and purpose statements for those listening and watching, both of the purpose statements that you read were use the infinitive, if you noticed. So for example, let's say that my purpose is to be successful. I'm making it very simple. I can go through my entire life, and the last 5 minutes of my life, I can be successful. What the infinitive does is it implies not now, it implies a future state. What I find much more powerful is the present progressive. So instead of saying to be successful, future, It's being successful, present progressive. And what that causes you, forces you really to do is look and say, well, am I being on purpose right now? Yes or no? If I am, good, do more of that. If I'm not, stop doing that and shift. So I think that's one of the major things that have been missing in purpose statements. But generally, I love the direction of them.
And that links up with a concept from your book where you talked about heavening as a verb. You know, like more present. How do we, like, that's something I'm curious about too, is like, how do we heaven? How do we not? In fact, this is, you know, this one thing you may not know is like, this is something we covered in a previous course called Submersion, which has to do with changing your relationship with reality. And one of the exercises there was to define your own name as a verb. So what does it mean to Martin? You know, what does it mean to Steve? You know, or Steving or Martining? You know,
yeah.
Make it more present. And then, you know, you could joke about that too, because people often come up with funny things that means to them. And it's an interesting way of thinking of yourself as a verb. You know, like, what are you really here to express? And what does it mean, you know, to Martin? Because that doesn't have to be something that you do or become in the future. That's something you are right now. And so it reminds you about being who you are, being present, but what is it that wants to express through you? And how does Martining relate to heavening?
Well, watch this. This is the book, right?
Uh-huh.
Tell me the title.
Project Heaven on Earth.
There's another title embedded in that. The first word, don't use it as a noun, use it as a verb.
Project Heaven on Earth. Ah.
So it's a double entendre. The notion being that we need to get in touch with our being first, projecting heaven on earth, and then the doing, project heaven on earth, so that we can have heaven on earth. So you talked a lot about soul and purpose, and that's one of the things I love about you and the stuff you write about, is you're normalizing that part that has been suppressed or hidden or not okay for public conversation. And I think what's going on in the world today, Steve, the metaphor that I use is you're standing on the edge of the ocean and there's a storm at sea on the ocean. It's all, you know, the climate change, the political scene in the US, Brexit, French strikes, blah, 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 the Syrian thing. But when you dive underneath, there's the peace, there's the quiet, there's the soul. For me, what all of this turmoil on the surface is doing is forcing us to go deeper into our souls and to express more of that in the world. So the work that you're doing, the reason that people have joined your group, I think is because of that. And the more we can normalize that it's okay for us to do that, not only okay, but required, the more we shift to the new level.
I think that's a key part of what our group does for people. Somebody just recently sent me a testimonial about how Conscious Growth Club becomes a source of grounding in morality for him. And I think that's, you know, that.
Well, I got to interrupt you there.
Yeah.
I love that word, moral, you know, moral strength. It's so lacking, Steve. It's just because I'm in my own world. I'm on my own iPhone. You know, we spend a lot of time out of the US as well, and back in Canada. One of the things I noticed in the US is many times, when you say hello or greet somebody on the street here, nothing, no reaction, zero. It stuns me, because in Canada that would never happen. When you greet somebody, they greet you. Maybe not in the big cities, but certainly where we are. And certainly in Europe. I mean, to just come in. I remember once I went into a patisserie, a bakery in Paris, and I was thinking about something else, and she said, you know, in French, good morning, and I said, I'd like 3 croissants, and she just went white, because I didn't acknowledge her by saying good morning. And I, as soon as I realized what I'd done, I apologized. Nope, too late. You didn't acknowledge my existence. So we are, the desire to acknowledge each other's existence and to have the soul that wants so desperately now to come out. That's what your work, what my work, what the TLC people's work, many people's, but it's still under the surface, right? It's not public yet. Not that it's secret, but it's just, I think of the US example of African Americans in the South in the 50s and the 60s, all these meetings going on in church basements. And then all of a sudden, boop, out pops Martin Luther King. But he didn't come from nowhere. The ground was being hoed and weeded and seeds planted and water and light so that it could come. And so I think all of this stuff that we're doing, I don't know how it's going to show up, but I do get, because I'm involved in more conversations like this, Stephen, day after day after day. People are hungry for this kind of communication.
You remember what you were telling me a while ago, I think it was sometime last year, about Googling the term heaven on earth and just how you've been seeing it increasing. Do you want to share that?
Well, yes. So we started on heaven on earth, which I want to talk a little bit about too, about the whole structure of that. But I thought, how do I know this is showing up? Well, there are projects that people are doing around the world that we can speak about. But I went to Google and I put in the phrase, in quotes, heaven on earth, quotes, 2018. And I think it was about 6.1 million results, not all mine. Last year, 2019, it was 11.2 million. It was up 84%. And this year, I checked about a week ago, and it was 7.7 million.
Already for the year.
Already for the year. So something massive is going on in culture, in English-speaking culture. But I also actually looked at, for those of you in Germany, Himmel auf Erden. Ich habe geguckt auf das auf Google, my great German. And it's also increasing in Germany. Oh, sorry, amongst German-speaking people, rather.
It's interesting you say how, talking about the example of, having to pull out the weeds and water the soil, and then, that's the environment through which more, potentially more charismatic individuals grow up, more leaders emerge in different scenes. And one thing I've noted from, reading biographies of many interesting people, especially some notable historical figures, is that they so much become a product of the environment in which they grew up. Like I recently read the biography of Albert Schweitzer, and starting a major hospital in Africa, and becoming somewhat of an activist for denuclearization, and just a winner of the Nobel Prize as well, and finding that so much of it links back to his upbringing, where he grew up in Europe. And what I am seeing, though, is I am seeing, at least in my field of personal development, I am seeing a lot more individuals emerge and a lot more activity where it does seem to be changing the soup out there. When I started blogging in 2004, I was the only one I knew who was really dedicated to blogging full-time about personal development. And there were already 8 million blogs when I started. Now, I wasn't aware of all of them. So I'm not saying that other people weren't blogging about personal development back then. I'm sure they were. I just wasn't aware of them. They weren't so much on the radar, because blogging back then was more of a hobbyist thing. It was like journaling on the internet. It's like, oh, here's what I had for breakfast, that type of thing. I did yoga today. And I had this vision at the time that it could become more than that, but I didn't necessarily know how I would create that. But I really resonated with what you wrote in your book about coming up with this impossible vision, because the one thing that drove me more than anything else was to create a more growth-oriented world. And part of my vision was just being able to walk into like a coffee shop, say a Starbucks, and instead of hearing people talk about, things that were stressing them out in life or just everyday concerns, actually hear people talking about personal growth or mission or purpose or what I want to accomplish in life or spirituality, or more of the higher level topics that bring us together rather than the smaller things that maybe slow us down or just distract us. And what's interesting is I've been seeing that idea, that vision, become more and more of a reality, but it doesn't feel like something I've been doing as an individual. It does feel like something I've been participating in and contributing to, but it feels more like there's a bigger energy, like a voice of humanity speaking through me, as if it's like this idea of this aspect of heaven already exists, and it says, make me real, give me form, give me substance, bring me to your planet. And it often feels like a lot of the articles I write, they're written through me, not, not like coming up with the idea mentally and thinking, okay, I'm going to write this for, for my business reasons or traffic reasons or things like that. I think what people don't realize how much is how well many people do in business by not focusing on the business side.
Yeah.
Like how much, like I've met many entrepreneurs, and I know you have too, and many business owners. And when I talk to them behind the scenes, spirituality is a common topic. Vision, purpose, mission. It's so much about their relationships with people, with life, with their work. But then what often goes out into the marketing space and the endpoints that many people hear, it makes it seem like it's so much more about success and money. And while there is that aspect to business, it's, behind the scenes, it's not necessarily the thing that drives people the most. Is that something you've seen as well? Like when you...
Very much so. Very much so.
Why is there that disconnect? Like, is it because, as you mentioned, like the public conversation isn't at that level, but somehow privately we're okay to go to that space in smaller groups? Like maybe we feel safe having those conversations?
I think what's going on, you and I and those people listening now, there is something coming into society. Let me say, call it, heaven on earth is coming in. So that is a meme that's coming in, a thought form, and the Google numbers show me that, plus examples, which we'll get into. In addition, there's something in my own soul calling me forth to do this. So when your soul called you forth, it's both the individual and the collective. And for me, the work is to go more into the individual and meditation and having conversations like this, and also to be hyper aware of what's happening in society as this comes in. The disconnect between the kind of public normalized conversation that business is and what's wanting to express itself, that on that cutting edge is where I think you and I and many other people are working, because we want to normalize it and say, this can be part of business. So, when I talk about heaven on earth, we've just begun lately to have some companies express some interest in it. So that's another thing that I'm watching. This medical device company wanted to come in for some reasons they couldn't do it, but that was a first for me. So I'm hyper aware of how it begins to show up. The other thing that you did not talk about, well, you did, but I want to make hyper clear, is the notion of intention and declaration. I know that you speak a lot about that, Stephen, and why don't we spend a little time on that? For me, getting clear about what my soul wants and what's needed in the world is so that then becomes my intention. So for example, this year, it's that heaven on earth becomes publicly, I've forgotten the exact words off the top of my head. I read this every morning. Something like publicly manifested globally. Okay. And so now I'm starting to look at, okay, so how is that showing up? So for example, a couple of weeks ago, I was doing a webinar for our friend Raymond Aaron, and there was a guy from Africa who lives in Canada. When he heard me speak about heaven on earth, it was like he exploded. He said, that's it. I want to have my continent, Africa, he's from Gabon, the country of Gabon, explode. I want it to, assume its rightful place in the world. And so he has come up with a project called Africa, a Heaven on Earth Continent. It's on Facebook. Africa, a Heaven on Earth Continent. It's amazing. There was a pain in him. Africa was not the way he knew it could be. He held the intention, and once he heard, in this case, Heaven on Earth, the declaration came out. Africa, a Heaven on Earth Continent. Once he and I, because I loved it, made the declaration, the Facebook group showed up. People are starting posting on that. So that process is, for me, that's the way I work, and I think that's the way you work. And I don't want to impose it on people. I won't impose it. I mean, that's just the way I work, and it works for me.
What you bring in your book as well is more of a global perspective, showing how what we want deep down is more compassion, connection, cooperation, unity. And I love that there's a part of your book where you have like quotes from people in different parts of the world all sharing what they want. And I'm just looking at this and like, okay, the one from France, the one from Germany, the one from Australia, the one from Africa, the one from India, and so on, all around the world. They all look great. Like that's something that, like I can agree with regardless of where I live.
So just to be clear, it's not a quote of what they want. It's a quote about what heaven on earth is for them.
Right. Exactly. Like what heaven on earth is in each, but speaking, so it's like, we're not so, maybe the word is corrupted by our cultures to think of ourselves in separate terms when we reconnect with this idea of creating heaven on earth, because heaven on earth is, it's like we remove the conflict aspect from it, the fighting, the separation, and we start thinking about the whole planet together as a whole. And you also use, the story about, I think early in the book, in the introduction or preface, the idea of the astronauts seeing Earth from space, and how initially they look for their hometown. Like that's the first thing they look for. And
called the overview effect. Yes.
Yeah, the overview effect. And then they look for maybe their state, but then they can't see or state or province, if they have one for where they're from, and they can't see the borders of it. Like if I try to look, I'm in Las Vegas right now. If I try to look at Las Vegas, I could see that lit up, from space. But I couldn't see, the state of Nevada. So like
nor the U.S.
Nor the U.S. because it's going to have borders, shared. But then you can see, like you mentioned, you can see island countries, say Australia, because they're bounded by the ocean. But eventually, the astronauts get to the point where they just sort of take in the whole world, as a whole. And it's kind of interesting because it's like an analogy for how we grow as individuals. We start thinking of ourselves very at the individual level.
Yes.
And then we can start thinking more globally. And I think one thing that's creating a tremendous shift is the internet. Even in the 1990s is when I started my first internet business and got my first online sale with my computer games business in 1995. And right away, what fascinated me about it was that it was a global business. I had to learn international shipping, like how to mail, initially it was 3.5-inch floppy disks and then CDs, and I had to mail them all over the world. And so I started having customers just globally instantly with that business. And that immediately changed my perspective, because I thought I have customers who are patronizing my work. Like there are people playing my games on the other side of the planet. Now when we post things online, through blogging, through, posting videos online and so on, we are, immediately wrapping the planet. We're instantly, we can be connecting with somebody on the other side of the world. And I think that's changing a lot of people's perspectives. Is there a place then for countries in the future? I'll share my opinion, and I want to hear yours too. I think there is, but I think it has to do with, I don't necessarily see us becoming a giant melting pot where we all just dissolve and have this kind of amorphous blob of humanity with all this singular, blurry culture all over the world. I actually really like, especially when I travel, all the rich cultural differences we have. But I think it can work even better if we can start aligning our cultures with seeing the value they provide to the world, like the sense of hope, where we're all contributing something. Like some countries may contribute more technology, some may contribute more depth of spiritual knowledge, some may contribute agricultural knowledge, and so on. But every culture can be part of the voice, part of the whole. Just as us as individuals, we can't talk, we can't individually, as a single person, tackle every problem in the world. But what your book mentions too is that you take that next step. You just lean towards the stuff that appeals to you right now, and you have a lot of options for doing that. Tackling problems in education or government or the military or personal growth or vision or corporations, business, and so on. There's so many different directions we can go. I'm just curious how you feel about like the role of countries, and like, what does it become in a heaven on earth environment?
The stage of development that we're at today, I have people who spontaneously have taken on their nation becoming a heaven on earth nation. And the most powerful example of that was this woman Elizabeth, or is this woman Elizabeth, in a little city called Lienz, Austria. I was doing a Shift Network webinar, and we were looking at what's your heaven on earth project, and she said, oh, that's easy. Austria is a heaven on earth nation. And I went, whoa. Where did that come from? Why did you say that? And she said, well, because it's simple. So she taught me about the power of the word simple, that I don't know what your simple is. For her, taking on her nation is simple. So we have people taking on at various degrees of engagement: Denmark, Croatia, Hungary, Canada, Mexico, Argentina, and the continent. So, and I'm with you in terms of our human development to date, that when I go and visit another country, I'm hypersensitive to how this personality called this nation has developed and what it gives. As a friend of mine said years ago, each country has their brilliance and each country has their bullshit. And so that learning really shifted me. We're going to travel in Europe next. And I love going to other countries because I see how my being actually shifts, and it expands my being. And with more, as you said, as we're more global citizens now, because one of the sections in the book I talk about, I ask you to be responsible for the world, for making the world work. Now, at first thought, you're oh my God, that's too big. I can't do it. It's impossible. But if we put our objections, our mental objections aside, do you not have a vision for the kind of world you want? And the answer is yes, you do. Everybody does. And so what Heaven on Earth does is bring that out. This might be a good time, Steve. We didn't do this. I didn't ask you this before, but can I ask you the 3 Heaven on Earth questions?
Yeah, absolutely.
And I would like the people listening, I'll do this very slowly, so you'll hear Steve answer.
For people on the live chat, since we're recording this live, feel free to answer these for yourself too. And also, after we do these, Rochelle mentioned that there's at least one question from the chat channel that somebody wanted to ask. So we'll use that as a seed for, more conversation.
Perfect. And these questions, you can go to Project Heaven on Earth, my website, and sign up for the free course, and they'll give you the questions. So question number 1, recall a time when you experienced heaven on earth. Recall a time when you experienced heaven on earth. What was going on?
Oh, you want me to answer that?
Please.
I don't know. Well, okay, so I have to get past all the naughty stuff first. There was one time where I was in Romania, in Bucharest, and I was there on vacation for about 3.5 weeks, just hanging out. It was my first time there, and I was hanging out with a friend. And some people were nudging me to do a workshop there. And I was like, I can't do a workshop during the time I'm here. It's just a vacation trip. I'm just hanging out. And yet they were kind of insistent. And I used to joke with them that the word, the English word no must translate to yes in Romanian. Every time I would say no, they would just be like, yes, we're going to, like, as if it was a foregone conclusion that I was going to do this. So they just created this vision. And, my ex-wife, Erin, and I had a term for this kind of experience. It's called outgoaling. When somebody has a bigger vision or a bigger goal than your smaller no. Ooh. And so they outgoal you. And that's basically what happened. I decided, all right, there's a bunch of people asking me for a different kind of workshop, and I'd never even been to, Eastern Europe before. So I'm like, I don't have any way of doing a workshop here. I have no connections with the hotels or whatever. There's no time to do it. It takes me 3 months to plan an event. And they said, no, we'll help you. So I said, all right, I'm going to get a bunch of people together in a room at a friend's place, and we all get together. And I'm, about 7 people there, because different people from different social circles asking me for an event, but one on entrepreneurship, one on lifestyle, and the other one I think was one on relationships or something like that. So I'm like, all I have to do is put these people together in a room, and they won't agree, and then I'm off the hook. And then they'll see it's not going to work. They'll just argue with each other. They're very passionate people. I'm like, all I got to do is put them together and watch the fireworks, and then I'll just, sneak out the back door. And exactly the opposite happened. they gelled incredibly well, and they just started yes-anding every idea until within 3 hours, we had a name for the event. We called it Lifestyle Connect. We had a URL registered for it. We had one person with a hotel connection who could get us a space at like half price, meeting room. And like literally we met on a Thursday, and 9 days later on a Saturday, we did the event. So imagine going from just like having the idea to doing a live event with, you know, in a hotel ballroom with 50 people showing up, including some from other countries. Mostly it was people from Romania, but we had someone from, I think, Denmark, and a couple people from Bulgaria showed up. And it was beautiful. It's just a one-day event. It was simple. It even made a small profit, which the team split. And I just thought, how did this happen? It was just like, it was mind-blowing, just showing me how, you know, like I had all these rules for how things had to happen. And if people just say, let's do this.
Yeah.
Why was big enough. That's the thing, is like they had a way bigger why for making this happen than I had for saying no. And so I just found myself getting pulled along by their energy. And I'm like, all right, I guess this is happening. So then I got on board and I agreed with it. And I was like, all right, let's do this. And I ended up doing about half the content for the event. And then the other, I think we had 5 or 6 people contributing the other half. And it was beautiful, and people really liked it. And they found it a transformational event. But why I found that to be heaven on earth was just like how the vision and the purpose just knocked down every obstacle in the way, and how I would have said, no, that can't happen. You know, I was trying to say no and it didn't matter, you know, and like, it was people from a culture that was much less abundant than the one I grew up in. And I thought, if they can do this in Romania, you know, where there are like big potholes in the sidewalk that you have to avoid so as not to fall in, with like 6 feet deep holes as you walk down the street, because the street's not very well repaired in a lot of places. About 40,000 wild dogs running around Bucharest. And just, you know, thinking of the challenges, the crumbling infrastructure in a lot of places. But they have really good internet because they got it later than many people, at least when I was there. That was back in 2013 when I was there. And I just realized, you know, what in the USA do we have to complain about? We create all these obstacles out of thin air that people from other cultures, they just look at, and their ability to do teamwork just crushes the obstacles because they just focus on the opportunity, and that gets them so excited. And I saw so much evidence of people in Romania getting so excited about personal growth concepts that I thought were the most basic stuff, like having a positive attitude. And they were excited to spend a whole day working on that in like some other workshop I learned about that was going on there. And I'm like, that's it? That's what you want to invest in? I'm like, okay. This would be the kind of thing that, you know, many people in the USA just sort of take for granted. But there, it's excitement, investment. Let's get into this. I see there's a comment in the chat channel for, you know, now let's hear the naughty version, Steve.
So that was question 1.
Yeah, so that's going to take another half hour to get to questions 2 and 3.
Right.
But I wanted to give a thorough answer to that one. I know the other 2 questions I can do those a little more simply. But
all right, so that, and I'm going to go through the questions again and talk about their structure and why they're set up the way they are. Mm-hmm. Second question: imagine you have a magic wand, and with this,
actually, I have an elder wand from Harry Potter. So,
all right, so you do have a. So you have a magic wand, and with this wand, you can have heaven on earth. What's heaven on earth?
You know, the one thing that really resonates with me lately, I sometimes come up with different answers to this, but the one that's been resonating with me a lot lately is that humans have a very different relationship with the animals of the earth. We treat the animals, you know, very poorly today. You know, tens of billions of animals are killed for food every year, and you know, and kept in terrible conditions and tortured much of their life, pulled away from their babies, and so on. And I think heaven on earth can't really have that as part of it. So I think of heaven on earth as us having a very positive relationship with animals, treating them with respect, you know, seeing ourselves as stewards. And I especially think that's important as we get into the development of AI, because if AI treats humans like humans treat animals, that's not good. You know, that's basically, we have a situation that makes the Terminator look like Mary Poppins. It's horrible. And I see heaven on earth as us having a more loving and caring and compassionate relationship with all life. Albert Schweitzer described it as reverence for life. That was part of his philosophy. And when I read that, it's like that term reverence for life, it really resonates with me. That's really something that creates a, emotional vibration in my heart when I say those words.
Very clear, Steve.
I think that's something that's missing.
Very clear. Third question, what simple, easy, concrete step will you take in the next 24 hours to move that forward?
Doing what I've been doing for the past 24 hours too. Sharing, blogging every day this year, sharing a vision. I've written a lot about, different ways to improve as individuals, and connecting the dots between improving ourselves as individuals and improving the world. So, later today, I'll be writing another blog post. I'll be recording another lesson for a course we're working on called Stature, sharing that with the hundreds of people going through that. I feel like in terms of taking the daily steps, that's been really aligned in my life for many years. The key to that is listening to the voice of inspiration. I don't map out everything in advance. I don't have an editorial calendar for what I'm going to share. Every day, I just tune in and listen. And I basically ask life, what do you want me to share today? So it's like listening is such a huge part of that. I think people maybe push themselves to create too much before they can hear what they're being guided to create.
Yep. Yep. Very beautiful. All right. Let me go through the questions. Recall a time when you experienced heaven on earth, and you spoke very beautifully about the Romanian experience and what happened there. What you did not do, Steve, and what no one does, is say, Martin, what do you mean by heaven on earth? I didn't define it, and yet you answered the question. Well, how could you answer the question? Because you have what I call an already knowing about what heaven on earth is within your soul, within your divine essence. And so when I ask, recall a time when you experienced heaven on earth, the Romanian example. So clearly examples are different, but people always know. That astounds me, Steve. And they never, or if they do ask, which is hyper infrequently, I won't answer the question. I'll say, well, what does it mean to you? The second question, imagine you have a magic wand, and with it you can have heaven on earth. What's heaven on earth for you? The reason for the magic wand is it removes the necessity of having to know how you're going to do it. And if you don't have to know how, you can focus on the what. And you went right to it. Animals. I wrote down some note, loving, caring, and compassionate. And then you proceed it all down to a reverence for life. Very beautifully said. So that were a reverence for life to be present in the world for you, that is for you heaven on earth. And then the third question, I don't want to just leave it as, okay, it's here. I want to actually have you take a step in the next 24 hours, simple step, very important word, simple, that will move it forward for you. Because when you do that, then you've begun to engage in experiencing and creating heaven on earth. That's what we're up to here. You have, by definition, by declaration, and by intention said, you know what? I do know what heaven on earth is. I've had an experience of it. I have a magic one. I'll tell you what heaven on earth is. Reverence for life. And this, I'm going to do this blog about this. I'm going to do this. And all of the stuff that I'm doing anyway, with a new context, creates the contribution for you of your contribution to heaven on earth. And thus, the new story begins unfolding alive. Because it's not only creating heaven on earth, it's co-creating heaven on earth. Mm-hmm. in the future, and it's experiencing heaven on earth here now. The belief that this is not heaven on earth, I think, is false. This is heaven on earth. And our belief that it's not keeps us away. We can do a simple little exercise for everybody listening and watching. I'm going to ask you just follow along with me. Just stop your mind and experience the heaven on earth that exists right here, right now. See how easy it is? That's what we're up to, Steve.
Yeah, it comes more from the heart than from the head. Yeah, it's like for me, it shows up as a feeling of compassion and connection. I think that's what many of us want, is we want more connection.
Well, let me just a little caveat here. I don't tell people what heaven on earth is, because that's imposing and that would never work. Rather, what this process does is evoke the heaven on earth that I know exists within you. So for you, if it's compassion, respect for life, great. My job is to make sure you're getting more of that. If for me, it's to get this message out to the world, then your job is to support me, should you choose. And so we need to find out what it is for people, and assuming no harm to themselves or others, support them in moving that out into the world. That's the new game. That's the new story that we are in.
Yep. I like that. Rochelle, have you got a question from the group?
Yes.
I know you mentioned there's something that wants to come through. Are you there, Rochelle?
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay.
Let's see. Well, Dimitri had a question.
Okay.
Yeah, well, he had a couple. I'll start with the first one. I don't know if you want to ask the second one or not, but he was wondering what Martin thinks about the nature of this reality. Like, is it a hologram, a simulation? Is it very objective?
Okay. Doesn't surprise me.
Yeah.
So we have a lot of conversations about this in our group. You know, like what kind of reality do we exist in? And because the way you think about reality often gives rise to what you think is important in life. You know, what's
and what is possible,
purposeful. And so, you know, we have a lot of discussions. Is this an objective reality? Is it a subjective reality? Is it like a dream world? Is it like a simulation? And one of the challenges there is that we can never really know for sure. Like we can feel it, but intellectually we can't necessarily work it out, because any one of those realities can simulate another one. A simulator can simulate an objective reality. An objective reality can build a simulator that you end up going inside of, much like the Matrix movies. A dream can dream up anything, you know, and so a simulator can create a dream, but an objective reality can, you know, you go to sleep at night and you're having a dream, and then you wake up and you realize, oh, that was just a dream. So, you know, where are we? What is the nature of the universe? So a nice, easy, light-hearted conversational question there.
My answer is I agree with Steve, and I like raspberries.
Raspberries all the way down, right?
All the way down. Just listen to my language here. I doesn't know.
Okay. I doesn't know. I like that. Okay.
Oh, you never? Oh, I never did that.
No, I don't think I heard that one before.
I call it the third person removal technique. So let me say, for example, I am afraid. That means my entire identity is afraid.
Mm-hmm.
But if I move it to third person verb, I is afraid, the statement is still true in the sense of that there's fear there, but I'm distancing it from it. So I can take a look at it.
Part of me, the I in this reality, the individual is afraid.
Correct. The I, that which we consider I, is afraid.
Sometimes I think of it as, sometimes I think of the emotions as not coming from my body, but as being part of the field of feedback through our senses that we receive. So for instance, just as you perceive sights and sounds through your eyes and ears, when you perceive emotions, say through your heart, I often see it as feedback generated by reality instead of necessarily being something so personal. That's been an interesting line of pondering, is when there's fear or anxiety, I think, oh, interesting. There's anxiety in reality right now. And I don't think of it as necessarily coming from me, but it's the feedback. So reality's saying, I feel anxious. And I go, oh, okay. Then why are you feeling anxious?
Yes.
And then I can take it a little less personally and maybe distance myself a little bit from the emotion while still being very aware of its presence. And that gives me more ability to work with it, to change it, to flow it. And then I ask, okay, where would this energy like to go? And oftentimes when there's a negative emotion arising, it feels like it's stuck energy that's not getting through the doorway it wants to flow through. And like even just this morning, I woke up feeling a bit anxious. Sometimes I get the energy from myself. Sometimes it comes from other people. Sometimes I don't know where it comes from. So then I'm like, all right, there's some stuck energy in me. Where do I want this to flow? And I realized I was thinking about all the creative stuff I have to do today. Okay, I have to do another blog post. I have to do another lesson for the course. We're having this conversation together, which I was actually very much looking forward to. But then it was like all the stack of stuff in my mind, stacking up. Like my whole day is filled out already with obligations or scheduled items. And that framing, I feel, is a lot of times it's the framing, the way I look at situations, that the reality says, well, I'm going to respond to that framing with a little anxiety or a little stress. So I'm like, all right, let's shift the framing. And you know what was interesting is one thing that shifted the framing was when I started going through your book more this morning. And as I'm going through the book, it's about creating heaven on earth, of course. And when I shift my mindset from the daily grind to, okay, what's this bigger picture vision, thinking more about purpose. And the questions, you asked me, I was thinking about those this morning as well. Not so much from the Romanian story, but I was thinking about the animal one this morning. And the more I thought about those and just sort of shifted my perspective, and especially the overview perspective with the astronauts kind of pulling back and, seeing their individual hometown and then pulling back and eventually seeing the whole planet, all that was transformational. It shifts. And then I noticed after like an hour or so, my vibe is feeling like happy, positive, and I'm like very much looking forward to the call with you and thinking this will be great. Get to talk to a long-term friend and have a deep dive into interesting conversation. And then I started thinking about like, oh, I wonder what blog post I'll write today. It'll surely be something interesting and inspiring. And I remind myself of how much I love to write and how beautiful it is to feel that flow coming through. And then the same thing with recording a lesson, designing and recording a lesson, how yes, it's a creative challenge and yes, it's work, but it's also soulful work. It's heart-aligned work. And so much of I've been noticing this pattern for the whole year because I've been having a year of a lot of creative output, daily blogging and doing 5 or 6 lessons a week for this new course. So I've been very busy creatively. And I noticed that I really have to be careful about how I handle that relationship, because it could slide towards feeling like overwork and obligation, in which case reality responds with a stress signal. Or it can slide towards joy and purpose and meaning and contribution, in which case reality responds with this feeling like my heart is lighting up and like it feels like connection and fun and playfulness and sharing. And it's there's so many different ways to let that frame slide one way or another. And so I often feel like emotion that we experience is reality's response to our frame, to like how we're looking at it, as if it's saying, I don't like how you're relating to me right now. So I'm going to, give you a little zing of negative emotion there, make you not feel so good because I don't appreciate being framed that way. But if you frame me like this, then I reward you with some joy.
I love it. I never thought of it that.
Towards a more positive relationship with reality. And in a way, human relationships are much the same.
I was thinking the same thought.
Your partner, you get stress coming back in the relationship. You love and hug and appreciate your partner, you get love and hug and appreciation coming back. It's like it's an interesting way of seeing emotional feedback from reality.
So to frame it in terms of what I'm talking about, this is hell on earth. No matter what we do, yes, some things get better, but no, they really don't. Good. Well, then let's put a new frame on it called we are experiencing heaven on earth, and we are creating more moments of heaven on earth in subsequent moments. When you get that, it's joyful and playful. And when it comes back, so my thing is, I didn't do enough today. That's my, I didn't, and I've been watching my mind and allowing that to just flow out. And when it flows out, back in joy again, back in heaven on earth again.
See, that's really interesting because it's a frame that reality rewards.
That's a beautiful way to say it. Rewards, and I believe that reality wants. I mean, where does it say that it has to be hell on earth? Where does it say that suffering is mandatory or womandatory?
I don't know. It seems like there was some of that in my upbringing. But
I want to, I don't know how much time we have, but let me talk about some examples, because I think the examples of what people are doing when they discover what their project is. And we'll start with something very small. A woman in Hawaii has put her definition, she grows microgreens, and she has put her definition of heaven on earth, which in essence is recreating the Garden of Eden, as the end of every email that she sends out. It's embedded. And the second question that I ask, here's a magic wand, with it you can have heaven on earth. What's heaven on earth for you? She begins and then she says, and this is what it is for me. What's it for you? Simple. Our friend Justin, I don't want to say his last name, but the guy who does the sound.
I know who you're talking about.
Yep, is a cop, and he wrote a 16-page manual called Heaven on Earth for Law Enforcement. A real estate agent up in Halifax, Canada. We're talking about, is there a suffering in the world that really bothers you? And it was like I punched her in the stomach. She went so white, she said, yes, homelessness. Real estate agent working on homes. And so I said, all right, so what's heaven on earth for homelessness? And she said, well, obviously a home for everyone, but that's impossible, Martin. I'm a real estate agent. I work 87 hours a day. I'm in a relationship. You don't understand. I said, fine, stop.
87 hours a day?
Well, maybe 86 hours a day. Real estate agents have long hours.
We have some in our program, and yeah.
All right. So
it seems many real estate agents seem to want to leave real estate. They got better. Not all. Some are aligned with it.
So I said, okay, so what are you going to do? So she went back to her agency. There are 10 agents, sits them down and says, we're going to create a home for everyone. How? Easily. I'm asking you to agree that when you sell a home or an office building, that $100 will come off your commission check automatically, but all you have to do is say yes. They all said yes. Last time I spoke to her, about 2 years ago, they'd raised $400,000. The program is called A Home for Everyone. People in the community are invited, individuals or organizations, to submit a proposal for some of that money. And the judges, this is what I love, Steve, the judges are each of the 10 agents plus one of their clients. So those 20 people decide who gets the money every year. It's so elegant. I told you about the woman in Austria who's taken on Austria as a heaven on earth nation, the guy who said Africa is a heaven on earth continent. What's another one? Oh, a relationship therapist who now asks couples that are in trouble, what's heaven on earth for you in this relationship? How can you make it happen? So what stuns me is the creativity that emerges when people get that heaven on earth is now a possibility in the world, and that you can make a contribution that's unique and only you can make it. We need your individual contribution. And thus we begin to shift the story of what it means to be a human and what it means to be humanity.
That's beautiful. Rochelle, you noted we have another question, right?
Oh, I was actually thinking of a question from
you got a question.
Rochelle.
Yeah,
all right.
Here, I'll bring my video.
I know you, but there you are.
She's there. She's hiding.
Yeah, I'm hiding.
Are you in this? Well, you're obviously not in the same room. Okay.
Yeah, we're in different rooms. Same house.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Well, I was just thinking, I really love the idea of heaven on earth, but what happens when you have people who have this idea of heaven on earth? For them, it's heaven, and for other people, it's like a literal hell. Like say, it's a dramatic example, but say like Hitler, he had a vision, and his vision was probably his version of heaven on earth, but it was like really shitty for a lot of people. Like when that happens, like, I don't know, what do you have to say about that? Like if someone tries to implement their vision and
it's evil. Yeah, and it's hurtful to them or others.
Mm-hmm.
What I have to say is I don't agree with that. I don't want that in the world. And the vast majority of the people in the world are good, honest people who want their own lives and the lives of their nation and the world to be better. And I want that group of people to be in control of the world, not the crazies, not the Hitlers of the world, the Assads of the world, the Putins of the world. I want us, this silent majority who's sick and tired of the hells on earth, to say, you know what, enough of this nonsense. Here's what heaven on earth is for me. Here's my simple project. I'm starting today. I'm going to start doing it. that's how this momentum begins to grow, and what seems impossible suddenly gains more and more, not only possibility, but potential. And we actually start to see the examples showing up live. So an example, you and I are both from Canada, and I don't know if there are other people from Canada here, but my wife and I spend the summers in Prince Edward Island, Canada, which is the smallest province of the 10 provinces, and it's also the birthplace of Canada. About 15 years ago, I was doing a workshop there, and this thought popped into my mind. Prince Edward Island is Canada's first heaven on earth province. And I thought, what? Nah. I dismissed it. Started talking. Again, the thought, dismissed it. Third time. And I just said, okay, so clearly it's here. And I just declared it. I said, Prince Edward Island is Canada's first heaven on earth province. Since that time, Rochelle, there's a coffee shop that has a heaven on earth coffee. There's a tea merchant who's blended a heaven on earth blend of tea from teas all around the world. Anderson House, which is a home for abused women, has had a heaven on earth fundraiser to stop violence against women. The Kiwanis Club, which is a service club, this amazes me, has an award, which is 4 years old now, called the Heaven on Earth Leadership Award, that is open to any child in the province in either public school or high school. They have to come up with their own heaven on earth project, and then they have to do that, and then they have to send the result in, and it's judged, and they get a cash prize. And finally, 2 summers ago, I thought, what could take this to the next level on the island? And I thought, wait a minute, there are 4 political parties on the island. I know the leaders of 3 of them. And this woman that I was working with said, well, I know the leader of the 4th. We went and interviewed each of the 4 political party leaders on PEI, and each of them spoke about what heaven on earth is for them, the province, the world, and what they're going to do about it. And as far as I know, that's never happened, that all political party leaders talked about what heaven on earth is. So that came out of this intrusion thought, and it's begun to engage people more and more as an act of normalcy on the island. So to your point earlier about Hitler, yes, Hitler was an aberration. Yes, evil exists. But the majority of people on Prince Edward Island, this majority is growing and growing. You can see how 5 or 6 years ago when I talked to my neighbors, and now, oh yeah, okay, fine, heaven on earth. It's normalized. It's incredible to me. So that's my little laboratory. I hope that answers your question.
I'm pretty sure you had Rochelle when you said heaven on earth coffee. So if PEI is first, who's last? I'm saying Alberta.
No, we actually had a guy. There was a woman. I don't even remember. It was one woman several years ago who said Alberta's a heaven on earth province, but I never heard of him after that. There's a guy who's thinking about it for Nova Scotia. What?
The province ate him.
The oil industry. Well, no, listen. For those of you who don't know, Alberta is the oil-producing province of Canada, very wealthy province. The premier, who is, say, Republican, very right-wing, said about 2 or 3 weeks ago that he saw the end of oil. He saw that. And he wanted to transition the province away from that by 2050. Now, I know that's a long way away, but the premier saying that was astounding to me, astounding. So, who knows? And that's the other thing. It unfolds in ways that we can't even imagine, right? We put it out there and who knows?
How do we, one thing I'm curious about is how do we keep from backsliding? I know, especially in certain countries, USA being certainly one of them, a lot of people feel we're backsliding politically, environmentally, morally, ethically, just about any way you look at it. A lot of people think, not everyone agrees, of course, but a lot of people think that we're going the wrong direction.
Yeah.
That we're, picking more fights, we're creating more belligerence, creating more conflict, creating less cooperation, more strife, more partisanship. How do we as individuals confront that? Do we, is it better to just attack even more those with opposing views and make them even more wrong? Do we look for common ground? You know, how do we you know, do we just focus on creating the heaven on earth and ignore the hell on earth? It sounds like you would not necessarily suggest that.
I would not. One of the chapters in the book, as you saw, was ending the sufferings. Part of creating heaven on earth is dealing with the hells on earth. Very clear to me. You cannot escape that. You know, the situation right now in Idlib province in Syria, the bombing, the 900,000 people, you know, sent out of their, having to leave their home and up against the Turkish border. Terrible. That is a hell on earth. That has to be addressed. We as humanity have to address that consciously and compassionately. For me, I think that, as I said earlier, the political situation in the US is an opportunity, first, because yes, it's going on, to go deeper into our own souls and say, okay, what is my contribution to moving, in my case, heaven on earth, and hopefully in your case, heaven on earth forward? How does my soul speak at this time? I think part of President Trump's purpose is to have us go deeper into our soul and express that.
Mm-hmm. I noticed we had I think it was in August of 2018, I did a course called Deep Abundance Integration, and it was basically 30 webinars in 30 days. So live, but talking about abundance. And we had hundreds of people on each call. And at one point, we had people rate on a scale of 1 to 10 what they thought of Donald Trump. And what was interesting is a lot of people wanted to give two answers. One very low, like a 1. Most people, I think, gave a 1 for their answer, or a 2 or something like that. And some people wanted to give a 10 because of the polarizing effect, because people kind of recognize the immediate effect is not necessarily good, but it's giving rise to a strong counter reaction. It's waking up a lot of people. And I think it's moving a lot of people away from what I've heard referred to as new age narcissism. You know,
yes.
Get into that bubble of like, if I just think positively and I just meditate all day, life will be beautiful. And, you know, I'll be surrounded by hummingbirds and flowers and, you know, everything will be great. And unicorns will show up. And, and I can just focus on my bubble of heaven and ignore hell. And now people are faced with the confrontation of hell being shoved in their face daily, you know, through media, and it's just like you can't get away from it. It almost feels like it reminds me of Agent Smith in the Matrix movie describing what it's like, you know, to be this AI creature in humanity, and he's like, it's the smell. You can't get away from it. It's like you're immersed in it. You're in the stink, in the stench, and you can't get it off your body. And he's like, it's disgusting. And, you know, the sweat that's on him and stuff, and the flesh. And it's kind of like, I think that same feeling for a lot of people. Like we feel like we're exposed to something that's dirty and rotten. And, you know, instead of this feeling like we're draining the swamp, it's feeling like we're thrown into the swamp. And how do we get out of this? And how do you be in that kind of situation and not feel disempowered by it to the point where either you want to just pretend it's not there, or distract yourself, or just attack anybody who brings it up?
I was at my foot doctor yesterday, and we were talking about stuff like this. And somebody had come into her several weeks ago, and she said, I told him
on some Legos or something like that.
Yeah, wouldn't that be funny if her practice, the podiatry practice, is called Lego? And so she said to him, look, get off TV, get off the internet, go for a walk. And it transformed the guy's life, because she said, when you go up, that you see nature, you talk to people who are nice, it's soul enriching. And so I've been thinking a lot lately about, and I know at one time, I don't know if you still are off Facebook, but the addiction to Facebook and computer and TV. Yeah. The internet addiction. We got other questions here. It was a long, any other questions?
Do you have a question for us, Rochelle? There is one. I can.
Yeah, there's one that, well, it's a long.
You want to share the one from Christine?
Yeah.
I'll just pop in there.
she says a long question. So 2 weeks
Okay.
ago, I'll just read it directly. So this is
Yeah.
from Christine. 2 weeks ago, I attended a corporate meeting on sustainable development. An employee asked about producing indestructible products to preserve the environment, and one of the officials answered that the company's goal is going concern to ensure the, maybe she means ongoing concern, to ensure the company's survival and the preservation of jobs, which is a priority over general interest. I'm not sure if I follow that.
Yeah, I do. That she's
okay.
saying the corporation's interest is above the collective interest.
Yeah,
Okay.
community health or the interest.
And then she continues and says, I think it is a very honest answer. As companies are organized now, financially and legally, their interest is often in contradiction with public interest. So what do you think of that? Are company managers aware of these contradictions, and how do they manage them?
It relates to what Steve and I spoke about earlier in the conversation, that the fact that, what's her name, Christine?
Mm-hmm.
That Christine, that you saw it, talks about the discrepancy, the dissonance that you see. And my request to you would be, what is a simple, tiny little thing that you could do to move your vision of the way that corporation or corporations in general could be? Rather than saying, it looks, this is my interpretation of what you're saying, Christine, it looks like I'm overwhelmed by the system. I can't do anything because that's what a corporation is in today's world. And yet we know there are many corporations who don't hold that, who hold much, much different. So this may have been for you a gift, in the sense of reality saying to you, this isn't the way it should be. And so that's my request to you. Come up with a little simple heaven on earth project that you can do that would make this company a heaven on earth company.
I noticed that's one of the ways to follow our own path with a heart, is notice what's coming up for us. Like Christine, attending this meeting. And then the question is, like, if it's coming up for you, what can you do about it as an individual? And sometimes it's just getting the energy flowing, like by talking about it. So one thing Christine could do would be to talk to this person who brought this up at the meeting, if she can get their contact info, and say, I liked what you had to say, or I support you, or, instead of the official answer coming back. Because sometimes just getting people talking behind the scenes in private, you find that there's a surprising amount of agreement in what's going on. And then that creates a bigger and bigger movement. For instance, like more Google employees speaking out, more Amazon employees speaking out, and and feeling more empowered to do that. And one of the things I've seen with blogging is that as I've written about certain topics and leaned into doing something, if I write about something new, I empower other people to feel like they have permission to share that as well.
Yes, brilliant. Exactly. So my speaking about heaven on earth is giving people permission to say, the kind of life and nation and worlds and relationships and work that you want, it's possible now. Go for it. Go for it.
Yep. We have to be patient because it's a long path. Now in my 16th year of blogging, I'm seeing more and more how the dots are connecting with seeds I planted in 2004, 2005, even going back to 1999 when I wrote my first article to help other people. I'm starting to see how those little seeds grow into saplings and eventually into trees. There are people that are running businesses now because of quitting their jobs that were unfulfilling to them and doing something more purposeful because of some article I wrote many years ago. But I couldn't see that at the time. We don't see how the whole path will unfold. It's like how Steve Jobs said, we can't connect the dots looking forward. We can only connect them looking backwards. Now, I don't fully agree with that because I think we can, to some extent, see some of the dots connecting forward. It takes a bit more mental work to be able to do that, though. But it is doable, like especially when we see that pattern in other people. It's one of the reasons I love reading people's biographies who do meaningful and purposeful things in life, is that they did have that little bit of vision that unfolded over time and they began to see how it could show up. They just had to keep betting on it. They just had to keep leaning into it. And sometimes it shows up in unexpected ways.
Unexpected ways.
Disneyland, for instance, happened partly because Walt Disney was stressed out, having health problems, and his doctor advised him to take a break from, working on the animation side of the business. And so he started playing with trains on the side, model trains essentially, and got more and more into trains, and became his healthier hobby, and an outlet for himself. And one thing led to another, and through a sort of convergence of other things, that helped spawn the creation of Disneyland. One of the reasons that Disneyland has a train going around the park. But it was, partly just leaning into joy, leaning into what gave him happiness. That was like his version of heaven on earth. And part of the vision for Disneyland was to give people a place to just be happy, a place to just have fun, and leave your problems and your worries behind. They don't necessarily deal with the evils of the world, but they focused on, that was the vision of creating your little patch of heaven, and creating a fun place for people to go and not hurt each other, essentially. I think one thing we're realizing now, globally, is that our vision of heaven on earth is not just about something we can create in isolation as individuals. We have to think about the ripples a bit. We do have to think about some of those dots that we're creating. And I think that's something that's become a bigger part of the conversation now. Yeah. Whenever something gets manufactured now, there's conversations about like, well, how do we deal with the waste that this is going to create? How do we make this more recyclable? It's really exciting to see people asking these questions that they weren't previously asking much. The idea that we can't just throw stuff away and it disappears is getting gone and is being removed from our vocabulary. And now we're starting to think more about sustainability. And I think it's like you said, where it's like a step in the right direction. It's a direction. We're not perfect yet, but at least if we're starting to ask some of the right questions, that's promising. That's hopeful. That's getting us leaned into the right direction. I think that's something that Donald Trump is helping to wake up in the USA. It's making people ask questions that they were being a little quiet about in the past. Now we're waking up and saying, is this really the kind of government, especially about government, is this really the government we want? Do we want a government that's constantly fighting it with itself, that can't get good laws passed, that can't create real change, that's being broken and being disempowered? Or do we want to create more agreement?
Yes. No, I'm just sitting here, Steve. I love this conversation. Bless you for this. When I started the idea of heaven on earth, 35 years ago, as I said earlier, it just popped into my head, and I said, that's it. That is the next piece of my life. Having no idea how this would all show up. And so now I have the book, and Beth and Ivan, I don't know if you saw my blog, presented my book to Sir Richard Branson. So he now has the book, because I want more.
Congrats.
Yeah, I want influencers to have the book. So I want to tell people that if you have this idea, if your soul is speaking to you about something deeply, go for it. Start simple, start small, but start the momentum. That's the word. Start the momentum, and watch how it shows up. As Steve said, some of it most of it you don't know, and it constantly. My wife says, "You talk about heaven on earth every day. Do you never get tired of it?" I mean, I never heard you get tired of it. No, it's so exciting to me. It's so joyful to my soul to see how it's showing up in the world. People are getting this. People are being it's normalizing. And I see the Google numbers, and I see the projects, and I see, Africa, a heaven on earth continent. I mean, I never would have had that idea. So that's the excitement to me.
What fascinates me is how clear it is, the excitement that flows through life when you're passionate about something that feels purposeful and meaningful to you. And yet how much time people spend defending the opposite of that they don't even want.
That they don't even want.
Exactly. Like
that's the underlying that.
I don't like my job. I don't like my relationship. I don't like my lifestyle, but I'm going to defend that space because it's all I have. Like, why do people do that? Why do they? That's a question I'm always asking, because I catch myself being tempted to do that sometime. And the answer I have is that it's a lack of trust. It's a lack of trust in reality. It's a lack of trust in life. And when I don't trust life, I shrink into my comfort zone. And then what I trust is the familiar. I trust the predictable. And what we don't trust is the unpredictable. And because that requires trusting something beyond ourselves. It requires trusting something beyond the I, beyond the ego. We have to trust the nature of reality, that what shows up that's going to be new, that's going to be unpredictable, could actually be better than the predictable and the familiar. But if the predictable and the familiar kind of sucks, like, what do we really have to lose that much, that's that bad? And I think that's the problem, is like, people think that if they let go of that status quo, if they let go of the familiar, if they let go of showing up to work, they don't even like, a job that doesn't feel inspiring to them, that they have to trust that and Steve Jobs said that too. We have to trust in something, whether it's, karma or life or ourselves or, something bigger than us. We have to find something to trust in. What do you trust in? Like, what made you take that leap? Because I imagine you had to trust in something to leave behind, say, government work. Was it God? Was it life? Was it the goodness of humanity? I learned to trust in reality. That's where I kind of grounded myself. I decided I have a choice here. I can either not trust reality or I can trust reality. And I just looked at the logic of it and realized my life will suck if I don't trust reality. And my life could be really awesome if I do trust reality. Even if reality is not trustworthy, the logic still works out. If you work through the math, it's better to trust, because then you just become a reverse paranoid, and anything that happens to you, it's like, oh, that was a gift instead of a punishment. If it's a punishment, you see it as a lesson. If it's a gift, you appreciate it as a gift. So either way, it's like win-win. You still see it as a win. Whereas on the other side, if you don't trust reality, then you're suspicious of the gifts. You think it's a trap, it's a trick. And if you get punished, you're like, well, I deserve that anyway. It's like, it is a punishment. So you can't win if you don't trust, but you can win if you do trust, regardless of how reality works.
I love the logic.
That's how I do the logic there. It's just,
I love the logic. I mean, I'm still trapped by, in a good way, trapped by your question. How did I know?
How did you trust? How did you trust that?
I knew.
Was it a moment of insanity? You just go, I'm just going to take this leap and leave behind security and go into the unknown. How do you trust the unknown?
I'm really struggling with my response to you. I just knew that this is where I was to go. It was my assignment.
You trusted that knowing then?
Yes. Yeah, that's very precise. That's it. Okay. And I've always been looked after. I remember once at Albuquerque Airport, I was going to LA or I don't know, somewhere for some important meeting, and the plane was busted. And the next morning, and my first reaction was, and I went, no, this is for the better. And we went, they put us all up at a hotel, and I met these incredible people, had these incredible conversations. And I just knew that if this door closed, there's another door that's going to be better, obviously, for me. And so that's the excitement, that's the play, that's the discovery. Let's see where this goes. That's the curiosity. Those are very important values for me. There was a book I read by Peter Kreeft, a philosopher in Boston, talking about heaven. And how do you know that heaven is actually present here? And he said, well, one way is through values: love, wisdom, beauty, kindness. And I went, oh yeah. I mean, my love of my wife, yes, all these things. And then he said, and play. And that blew me away, because that's a very important word for me. And because I know with you and I, that element of just, well, let's see where this goes. I don't know where it's going. Do you know where it's going, Steve? No, I don't know where it's going. Let's dive in. Yep. And trusting in that sense. So he said that one of the ways you can experience heaven here on earth is through play. I feel that with children. My wife says, when you're with a child, I mean, I go crazy. We play it because you never know where it's going to go with them, and they're present and going with it. So play.
Play. That's a beautiful way to trust in unpredictability.
Yes.
You don't know where the game of life is going to go, but and play is really partly an attitude. It's a choice, and so is trust. You can do things non-playfully, or you can do them playfully.
Yeah. I mean, I never thought that I made that decision, but I must have. Well, I don't know if I must have. I've always played. That's a very powerful word for me. I mean, people come to me and say, "Want to play with?" Sure. It's like, because I have no idea where it's going to go. People say, well, are you retired? Retired? I would just do what I'm doing. Why would I retire? It makes no sense.
It's like retiring from play. It's like,
no, right.
Yep. You retire from work, but yeah. So I think some people think that work can't be play. Have to be serious and professional and businesslike, and yet look at look at Richard Branson, for instance. He's a very playful person, isn't he?
Whoa, very much so. And these wild ideas, send people up into space for suborbital flights, and I mean all the incredible stuff that he's done.
Yep. I don't know. I'm kind of feeling like the energy of the conversation is about ready to wrap up.
I just felt it too.
I love the flow of this.
Good. I know you were concerned with that. So we did it. Rachel, thank you. Rochelle. Oh yeah, I did it again.
Okay.
For everybody,
a plug for my book on Amazon.
Get a copy of Martin's book, Project Heaven on Earth. I'll share a link to it as well.
No, actually, get 3 copies.
Get 3 copies.
You know what? One for you.
Okay.
One for somebody in your life right now who needs this book. Mm-hmm. And one for somebody who's going to come into your life that will need this book. And the other thing I want to talk about, Steve, is something called the Case for Heaven on Earth. If you buy 20 or more books and send me the receipt, I'll do a free webinar or free consult for you.
Oh, beautiful.
Okay. Called The Case for Heaven on Earth.
And your website is martinrutte.com.
No, I prefer people to go to projectheavenonearth.com.
Projectheavenonearth.com.
You can get a free course there, a weekly blog, which will normalize it, because the blog comes from all different kinds of perspective on different ways of looking at and experiencing and creating heaven on earth.
Okay.
Steve, thank you, dear. It's really wonderful.
You, it's been beautiful. I've very much enjoyed this conversation, personally, professionally, and playfully.
The 3 Ps.
Yep. And let's go out and, as a final call to action, if we were to give people a call to action here, what would it be to like maybe mine is, answer those 3 questions. Perhaps that's yours as well. But like, do you want to just share those 3 questions one last time?
Sure. And you can get them on projectheavenonearth.com. Okay. Recall a time when you experienced heaven on earth. What was going on? Imagine you have a magic wand, and with it you can have heaven on earth.
You have to get a wand, not a what is that? A Westin hotel pen? Yeah. Okay. Is that from Panama? Is that?
No, it's not a Westin hotel pen.
Get a real wand. Okay. You got to get Martin a wand.
Get me a wand, yeah.
Get a real wand for your prop. Okay. Will be part of your heaven on earth is get a wand. And
right. Oh my God, that reminds me. Are you going to Ireland?
Yes.
Okay, so we'll see you in Northern Ireland. Actually,
we should take you to the Harry Potter experience it's just outside of London. Yeah. Exactly. It's so fun.
I don't know. Is it?
We can get him a wand there. Yeah.
Yeah.
And the third question is, what simple, easy, concrete action will you take in the next 24 hours?
Get a wand.
Get a wand. This woman I was talking about, Elizabeth in Austria, I don't know how she did it, but she got a local monastery. She called it the Night of 1,000 Candles. They lit 1,000 candles in all different shapes. And when people walked in, she gave them a wand, in German, Himmel auf Erden, heaven on earth. And she asked them to wave it and describe heaven on earth for them. So, yes.
Okay. No more
Michelle,
muggle.
Thank you for this too. No more Westin for you.
No more muggle wand. You got to get a proper wizard wand, all right?
And thank you, all of you, for
thank you.
Great session.
I hope you guys enjoyed the conversation, and have a beautiful, growth-oriented day.
Thanks.
All right. Take care. Bye, everyone.
Bye.